The emergency lights flashed red across the massive chamber of the Galactic Council. Ambassador Cathara stood at the central podium, her blue-scaled hands shaking as she held the datapad. Around her, representatives from 43 different worlds sat in stunned silence. "The Kepler system is gone," she announced, her voice barely above a whisper. "All 7 planets, 22 billion souls. The void swarm consumed everything in less than 3 days." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The Kepler system had been one of their most heavily defended positions. 3 full battle fleets had been stationed there, equipped with the most advanced weapons the galaxy could produce. "How?" asked Ambassador Zorex, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. "The shield generators were supposed to hold for months." Cathara touched her datapad, and a holographic display appeared above the chamber. It showed the final moments of Kepler Prime. Black, writhing shapes poured from space like oil, covering the planet's surface. The biomechanical entities of the void swarm didn't just destroy, they consumed metal, energy, organic matter, even the electromagnetic fields that held atoms together. Everything became part of their growing mass. "The shields held for 6 hours, Cathara replied. "Then the swarm began eating the shield generators themselves. Our ships tried to retreat, but the enemy followed. They consumed our vessels while our crews were still inside them." The chamber fell silent again. This was the 47th world they had lost in 6 months. The void swarm had appeared from the dark space between galaxies, and nothing could stop them. Every weapon they tried, every defense they built, the swarm adapted and overcame. "What do our military advisors say?" asked the representative from New Terra Colony. General Vexhai, a tall warrior from the warlike Thraxian species, stood slowly. Even he looked defeated. "Our combined fleets have lost 80% of their strength. The swarm learns from every battle. When we use energy weapons, they develop energy absorption. When we use kinetic weapons, they grow stronger armor. When we retreat, they follow us back to our home worlds. How long do we have?" The question came from Ambassador Singh, representing the human colonies on the outer rim. Cathara checked her calculations again, hoping she had made a mistake. "At their current rate of expansion, the swarm will reach the core worlds in 4 months. If they continue to adapt at this speed, we estimate complete galactic extinction within 8 months." The word extinction hung in the air like a poison cloud. These were civilized beings who had spent thousands of years building a peaceful galaxy. War was something they studied in history books, not something they lived through. Their ships were built for exploration and trade, not combat. Their weapons were designed to disable, not destroy. "There must be something," pleaded Ambassador Chen from the Centauri Republic. "Some weapon we haven't tried, some strategy we haven't considered." General Vexhai shook his massive head. "We've consulted every military database in the galaxy. We've awakened AIs that have slept for centuries. We've even tried to negotiate with the swarm, but they don't communicate. They only consume." The chamber erupted in desperate voices. Some called for evacuation to other galaxies. Others suggested hiding in the galactic core where space was too dangerous for most life forms. A few even proposed surrender, though no one knew if the swarm would accept such a thing. Cathara raised her hand for silence. When the noise died down, she spoke again. "There is one option we haven't discussed." She touched her datapad, and the holographic display changed. Now it showed a single star system marked with warning symbols in every known language. Red text scrolled across the bottom. "Quarantine zone, no contact authorized, extreme hazard." "Sol system," she said quietly. The chamber went dead silent. Every being present knew that designation. Sol was the forbidden system, home to a species so dangerous that first contact had been banned for over 2 centuries. The world called Earth sat in a radiation-soaked system filled with asteroid belts and gravitational anomalies. The species that had evolved there, humans, were classified as Deathworlders. "You can't be serious," whispered Ambassador Zorex. Cathara pulled up the classified files. "According to our xenobiological studies, humans evolved on a planet that should have killed them 1,000,000 times over. Constant natural disasters, predators that hunted in packs, diseases that killed billions, and weather that could freeze or boil water within hours. Their entire evolutionary history is a story of survival against impossible odds." "That's exactly why we quarantined them," General Vexhai pointed out. "Every psychological profile shows they're too aggressive, too violent, too unpredictable for galactic society. Their ships barely qualify as space-worthy by our standards," added another representative. "They use chemical rockets and nuclear reactors. Their idea of life support is a metal box filled with poison gas that would kill most of us instantly. Cathara nodded. Yes, they're everything we're not. They're violent, aggressive, and they seem to enjoy dangerous situations. But look at what we're facing. The display switched back to images of the Void Swarm, the black writhing mass that consumed worlds. We need monsters to fight monsters, Cathara said. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Many representatives argued that contacting humans would be like opening a second front in a war they were already losing. Others pointed out that humans had never shown interest in leaving their system anyway. They seemed content to fight each other and their hostile environment. But as reports continued to arrive of more worlds falling to the swarm, the arguments grew weaker. Fear began to overrule caution. Finally, the vote was called. By a narrow margin of 3 votes, the Galactic Council authorized first contact with humanity. The message would be simple and direct. The galaxy was dying, and they needed help from the only species crazy enough to fight the impossible. Ambassador Cathara watched as the quantum communication array powered up. The message would take 2 days to reach Earth, encoded in mathematical concepts that any spacefaring civilization should understand. What have we done? Whispered Ambassador Zorax. Cathara looked at the latest casualty reports. 3 more colonies had gone silent in the last hour. Either saved the galaxy, she replied, or doomed it in a completely different way. The message launched into the void, carrying with it the hopes and fears of an entire galaxy. In the depths of space, the Void Swarm continued its relentless advance, unaware that the civilized species it hunted had just awakened something that civilization had spent centuries learning to fear. On Earth, radio telescopes began detecting the incoming signal. Deep in military bunkers, analysts started working to decode what appeared to be the first message from an alien civilization. They had no idea that their response would soon make the Void Swarm look like a minor inconvenience. The galaxy had cried out for help. Soon they would learn that help from Deathworlders came with a price no civilized species had ever imagined paying. Admiral Sarah Chen floated in the command center of the UES Valkyrie, studying the strange message that had arrived 2 days ago. The translation algorithms had worked around the clock to decode it, and the result was both fascinating and terrifying. "Run it by me one more time, Dr. Martinez," she said to the ship's xenolinguist. Dr. Martinez pulled up the decoded message on the main screen. The transmission came from approximately 27,000 light-years away, from what appears to be a galactic government calling itself the Council. They claim to represent dozens of different species across the galaxy. "And they're asking for military assistance," Admiral Chen said. "More than that," Dr. Martinez replied. "They're asking for help against something they call the Void Swarm. According to their data, this enemy has already destroyed 47 worlds and killed over 3 trillion beings." Admiral Chen absorbed this information. 3 trillion. That was almost half of Earth's population. What kind of enemy are we talking about? Biomechanical entities that consume everything: metal, energy, organic matter. They adapt to every weapon used against them and grow stronger with each victory. The Council's fleets have been completely overwhelmed. Commander Jackson, the ship's tactical officer, spoke up from his station. "Admiral, there's something else. The message includes detailed technical specifications of their military capabilities." "Show me." The screen filled with images of sleek, elegant ships that looked more like art pieces than military vessels. Their weapons were designed for precision strikes, their shields for deflecting specific energy types, their hulls made from lightweight materials that maximized speed and efficiency. "Beautiful ships," commented Lieutenant Wong from the navigation station. "Beautiful targets," corrected Commander Jackson grimly. "Look at these armor specifications. A single railgun round from our smallest destroyer would punch through their heaviest battleship like it was made of paper." Admiral Chen studied the data more carefully. These were ships built by people who had never faced a real war. Their weapons were designed to disable rather than destroy. Their tactics focused on minimal casualties and preservation of resources. Even their emergency protocols assumed that retreat was always an option. "They're fighting a war with exploration vessels," she realized. "That's not the strangest part," Dr. Martinez added. "The message includes a note that they had previously classified our entire species as too dangerous for contact. Apparently, they've been watching us for over 2 centuries, but were too afraid to make first contact." Admiral Chen raised an eyebrow. "Too afraid? Of us?" "According to their psychological profiles, they consider us Aggressive primitives with suicidal tendencies. They were particularly concerned about our habit of using nuclear weapons and our tendency to fight wars on our own home planet. Bridge crew exchanged glances. These aliens thought humans were dangerous because they fought wars? Because they used nuclear weapons? What did they use for weapons? Harsh language, Admiral, Commander Jackson said. I've been running simulations based on their technical data. If even half of what they're telling us is true, they're facing an enemy that could threaten Earth within a decade if it continues expanding. And they want our help because we're the only species they know of that's crazy enough to fight something impossible and win. Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment. Through the viewports of the command center, she could see the rest of the Terran defense fleet. 57 ships that had been built to survive in the hellish environment of the Sol system. These vessels could operate in solar flares that would fry any electronics the aliens had ever dreamed of. Their armor was designed to withstand impacts from asteroids moving at significant fractions of light speed. Their weapons were built on the simple principle that if something was worth shooting, it was worth shooting with enough force to turn it into component atoms. What's the crew's reaction to all this? She asked. Lieutenant Wong grinned. They're excited, Admiral. Most of them signed up hoping for some real action instead of just patrol duty around Jupiter. And our orders from Earth? Dr. Martinez pulled up another document. High Command's response was colorful. After they finished swearing, they authorized full mobilization of the defense fleet. Apparently, the idea of facing an enemy that eats entire planets was considered an acceptable challenge by the Joint Chiefs. Admiral Chen couldn't help but smile. Only humans would consider galactic-level extinction an acceptable challenge. How long to reach their space? At maximum burn, accounting for several refueling stops, approximately 6 weeks, reported the navigation officer. And our supply situation? Commander Jackson consulted his displays. We're carrying enough ammunition for a sustained campaign, lasting several months. Food and water recyclers are operating at full efficiency. The nuclear reactors are producing enough power to keep us going for years. Admiral Chen nodded. The Terran Defense Fleet wasn't just a military force. It was designed to operate independently in the most hostile environment humanity had ever encountered. Deep space between star systems was actually considered a relaxing environment compared to the radiation-soaked nightmare of the Sol system. Broadcast to all ships, she ordered. We are accepting the Council's request for assistance. All vessels will prepare for immediate departure to Council space. Make sure everyone understands we're not going as representatives of humanity. We're going as weapons. As the message went out to the fleet, Admiral Chen reflected on the irony. These aliens had spent centuries afraid to contact humanity because they thought humans were too violent. Now they were begging for that violence to save their civilization. Within hours, the Terran Defense Fleet was ready to depart. Ships that had been designed to fight pirates in asteroid fields and survive solar storms were about to face an enemy that had conquered half a galaxy. The aliens wanted monsters to fight monsters. They were about to learn that monsters came in many different forms, and the most dangerous ones were the ones that chose to be heroes. As the fleet engaged their drives and began the journey to Council space, Admiral Chen made one final log entry. Beginning operation to assist Galactic Council against hostile force designated Void Swarm. Fleet status, ready for war. Personnel status, eager for combat. Expected casualties, acceptable. Expected results, total victory or total annihilation. There is no middle ground when fighting for the survival of an entire galaxy. The fleet disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with it humanity's answer to the galaxy's cry for help. Behind them, Earth continued its slow rotation, unaware that its children were about to introduce the galaxy to the concept of human warfare. The Council had asked for help from Deathworlders. They were about to receive exactly what they had requested. The mining world of Keth Prime hung in space like a dying ember. What had once been a thriving colony of 8 million beings was now a half-consumed shell. The Void Swarm had arrived 3 days ago and was steadily eating its way toward the planet's core, consuming the heavy metals that had made this world valuable. Ambassador Kethera watched from the bridge of the Council flagship Harmony as the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace. She had expected military vessels, but what emerged made her question whether the humans had understood their request for help. The human ships looked like they had already been through a war. Their hulls were thick and scarred, covered in armor, plating that seemed excessive by any reasonable standard. Instead of the elegant curves of Council vessels, these ships were angular blocks of metal and weapons. They radiated heat signatures that would have cooked any Council crew alive. Those can't be military vessels, whispered General Vex High. They look like industrial equipment. Admiral Sarah Chen's voice crackled over the communication system, transmitted on frequencies that actually caused pain to several species present. Council Flagship Harmony. This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. We're here to assist with your pest problem. Pest problem. Cathara wondered if the humans truly understood what they were facing. Admiral Chen, she replied carefully, we appreciate your response to our request. However, we should warn you that the Void Swarm entities on Keth Prime number in the billions. Our strongest weapons have proven ineffective. Understood, came Chen's reply. We'll handle it. Recommend you move your ships to a safe distance, minimum 50,000 kilometers. 50,000 kilometers? The Council fleet was already at what they considered a safe distance of 10,000 kilometers. Admiral, with respect, 10,000 kilometers should be sufficient. Our shields can... Ma'am, Chen interrupted. In about 10 minutes, this area is going to become extremely unhealthy for anyone who isn't specifically built to survive it. Please move your ships back. General Vex High activated his communication system. Human Admiral, I must point out that no weapon system requires such extreme safety distances. What exactly are you planning? There was a pause before Chen responded. We're going to introduce the swarm to human military doctrine. Fair warning, it tends to be educational. Reluctantly, the Council fleet pulled back to 50,000 kilometers. From this distance, Keth Prime looked small and vulnerable, its surface crawling with the black mass of void swarm entities. The human fleet began to move toward the planet, and immediately everything about their approach violated every principle of civilized warfare that the Council understood. Instead of maintaining formation, the human ships spread out randomly. Instead of charging weapons at maximum range, they flew directly toward the swarm with what appeared to be reckless abandon. They're committing suicide, General Vex High said, in horror. The first void swarm tentacles reached out toward the approaching human vessels. The Council watched in fascination as the swarm's biomechanical arms wrapped around a human destroyer, expecting to see the vessel consumed like so many others. Instead, the destroyer's hull began to glow. The temperature readings from the human ship spiked beyond anything the Council had ever recorded. The void swarm tentacles touching the vessel simply vaporized. What are they doing? Cathara whispered. They're running their reactors beyond safe parameters, General Vex High realized. Those ships are literally too hot for the swarm to touch. But that was just the beginning. As more swarm entities surrounded the human vessels, the humans opened fire. Council weapons were designed to be precise and efficient. Human weapons were designed on a different principle entirely. The first salvo from the human fleet lit up space like a second sun. Kinetic rounds moving at significant fractions of light speed tore through swarm formations. Energy weapons that seemed to be nothing more than focused stellar matter burned through the planet's atmosphere. The humans weren't just shooting at the swarm, they were shooting through it using weapons that treated entire formations of enemies as single targets. Those aren't military weapons, someone gasped. Those are industrial mining tools. They were right. The humans were using equipment designed to break apart asteroids and tunnel through planetary cores. What the Council considered excessive firepower, humans considered standard mining equipment. But the Void Swarm adapted. It always adapted. As the human weapons continued to fire, the swarm began developing resistance to kinetic impacts and heat-based weapons. Within minutes, the black mass had learned to absorb and redirect the human attacks. The Council waited for the humans to retreat. This was the point where every other military force had withdrawn to reassess their strategy. Instead, Admiral Chen's voice came over the communication system again. All units, the enemy has adapted to our primary weapons. Switching to Doctrine 7. What's Doctrine 7? Cathara asked. But she received her answer immediately. The human ships stopped trying to fight the Void Swarm and instead began ramming directly into it. Not accidental collisions, deliberate, calculated impacts at maximum speed. The humans were using their own ships as kinetic weapons. They've lost their minds, General Vex High said. But as the Council watched in horror, they realized the human strategy was working. Each ramming attack destroyed thousands of swarm entities. And before impact, the human crews were evacuating in small pods that immediately began attacking the swarm from inside. They're boarding the enemy, Cathara realized. Human soldiers, in powered armor, were cutting their way through void swarm biomechanical structures, using weapons that seemed to be designed specifically for close-quarters combat in hostile environments. They moved through spaces that should have killed them instantly, breathing atmosphere that would have dissolved Council lungs, fighting at temperatures that would have liquefied Council blood. The Void Swarm, which had conquered 47 worlds by adapting to every weapon used against it, had never encountered an enemy that used their own destruction as a tactical advantage. How do you adapt to an enemy that considers acceptable losses to be 90% casualties? As the battle raged, more human ships arrived. Instead of pristine reinforcements, these were vessels that had clearly been damaged in previous engagements, but somehow kept fighting. Ships with entire sections missing, held together by what appeared to be emergency welds and sheer determination. "How are those ships still functioning?" someone asked. Admiral Chen answered, as if she had heard the question. "Council flagship recommend you document this engagement for your military archives. This is what warfare looks like when it's practiced by a species that considers survival to be optional. By the time the battle ended, 70% of the human fleet was destroyed or severely damaged, but Keth Prime was free. The Void Swarm, entities that had seemed unstoppable, were nothing but debris floating in space." The Council fleet approached the aftermath in stunned silence. The humans were already beginning salvage operations, pulling useful materials from both their own wrecked ships and the destroyed swarm entities. "Admiral Chen," Cathara called over the communication system, "your casualties." "Acceptable," came the reply. "We saved the planet and learned valuable information about enemy capabilities. Mission accomplished. Acceptable casualties. 70% losses, and the humans considered it acceptable. Admiral, how many more engagements can your fleet sustain at these loss rates?" There was a pause before Chen responded, and when she did, her voice carried something that made every council member's blood run cold. "Ma'am, with respect, you asked us here to fight an enemy that eats planets. Did you expect us to do it without breaking a few ships?" The council had asked for monsters to fight monsters. They had gotten exactly what they requested. The question now was whether the galaxy would survive its saviors. News of the human victory at Keth Prime spread across the galaxy, faster than hyperspace communication could carry it. For the first time in months, a world had been saved from the Void Swarm. But the reports that followed the celebration left many council members wondering if they had made a terrible mistake. Ambassador Cathara read the latest intelligence briefings with growing unease. The humans weren't just fighting the Void Swarm, they were hunting it. Admiral Chen's remaining fleet had split into smaller groups, each one pursuing different swarm formations across the galaxy. And everywhere they went, they left behind stories that civilized beings found difficult to believe. At the Nexus trade station, human forces had arrived to find a swarm infestation consuming the massive structure. Instead of evacuating the station, the humans had somehow convinced the swarm to chase them into the station's fusion reactors. The resulting explosion had vaporized both the swarm and half the station, but the humans had emerged from the wreckage claiming it was within acceptable parameters. In the Helix Nebula, a human destroyer had been completely overrun by swarm entities. The ship should have been consumed within minutes. Instead, the human crew had somehow turned the swarm's own biomechanical systems against it, using the enemy's adaptive capabilities to create a weapon that destroyed 3 entire swarm fleets before burning itself out. "They're not fighting a war," General Vexhai reported to the Emergency Council session. "They're conducting a scientific experiment using the entire galaxy as their laboratory." The reports kept coming. Human ships operating in the radioactive cores of dying stars using the stellar radiation as a weapon. Human crews abandoning their vessels to board swarm entities, then using their own life support systems as improvised bombs. Human commanders who considered the complete destruction of their own fleets to be a valid tactical option, as long as they took more enemies with them. "What kind of species thinks this way?" asked Ambassador Zorax, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Council's leading xenopsychologist, had been studying human behavior since first contact. Her report made for disturbing reading. "Humans evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill them," she explained to the assembly. "Their entire evolutionary history is a story of survival through violence, adaptation through suffering, and victory through sacrifice. They don't see acceptable casualties as a necessary evil, they see them as the price of accomplishment." "But 70% losses would end a war for any rational species," protested the representative from the Centauri Republic. "Not for humans," Dr. Vasquez replied. "In their history, they've had military units that continued fighting with over 90% casualties. They consider surrender to be more shameful than death, and they've never fought a war where complete extermination wasn't a possible outcome." The psychological profiles painted a picture of a species that was fundamentally different from every other known form of intelligent life. Humans didn't just accept risk, they sought it out. They didn't just tolerate uncertainty, they thrived in it. And most disturbing of all, they seemed to enjoy fighting impossible odds. There's something else, Dr. Vasquez continued. According to Admiral Chen's reports, human casualties are actually lower than expected because they're adapting to fight the Void Swarm more effectively. Adapting how? Asked Cathara. They're modifying their equipment and tactics based on what they learn from each engagement. But they're not just learning how to fight the swarm better, they're learning how to be more like the swarm. The implications of this statement sent chills through the assembled delegates. The Void Swarm's greatest strength was its ability to adapt and evolve. If humans were learning to match that capability, reports from the Outer Rim confirmed their fears. Ships that had been damaged in early engagements were returning to battle with modifications that shouldn't have been possible. They were incorporating swarm biotechnology into their own systems, creating hybrid vessels that combined human engineering with alien adaptive capabilities. They're becoming something new, Dr. Vasquez warned. The humans who return from this war may not be the same species we contacted. But even as the Council debated the implications of unleashing humanity on the galaxy, the results were undeniable. The Void Swarm's advance had not just stopped, it was being pushed back. For the first time since the crisis began, worlds were being liberated rather than consumed. The turning point came at the Battle of Omega Station, a massive military installation in the galactic core. The Void Swarm had concentrated its forces there, creating a biomechanical construct the size of a small moon. Every military analyst agreed that the position was impregnable. Admiral Chen's response was to request detailed maps of the station's reactor systems. Admiral, General Vexhai contacted her directly. Omega Station houses over 2 million Council personnel. Any attack that threatens the reactors could kill them all. Then we'd better make sure our attack works the first time, came Chen's reply. What followed was the most audacious military operation in galactic history. A single human destroyer, modified with swarm biotechnology and crewed by volunteers who knew they wouldn't survive, penetrated the station's defenses by disguising itself as a piece of space debris. Once inside, the crew manually overloaded the station's fusion reactors while simultaneously detonating their own ship's antimatter reserves. The explosion was visible from 50 light-years away. Omega Station, the Void Swarm construct, and unfortunately the human destroyer simply ceased to exist. But the 2 million Council personnel survived, evacuated by the rest of Chen's fleet in an operation that had been planned down to the second. How did they know the evacuation would work? Cathara asked after reviewing the battle reports. They didn't, Dr. Vasquez replied quietly. They calculated the odds at approximately 30%, but Admiral Chen considered those odds acceptable because the alternative was certain death for everyone involved. 30% odds. Any Council military commander would have looked for another option, waited for better circumstances, tried to negotiate. The humans had simply accepted the risk and executed a plan that no sane species would have attempted, and it had worked. As reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy, a pattern began to emerge. The Void Swarm, which had adapted to counter every conventional military strategy, was struggling to adapt to human tactics because human tactics weren't based on logic or self-preservation. They were based on a willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. The enemy is beginning to retreat, General Vexhai reported during the latest briefing. Swarm formations are pulling back from several contested systems. Retreating where? Asked Cathara. Back toward their staging area in the dark matter construct beyond the galactic rim. Our analysis suggests they're consolidating for a final defensive stand. The dark matter construct was the Void Swarm's primary base, a structure so massive it defied comprehension. Intelligence suggested it contained the equivalent of several dozen solar systems worth of consumed matter, all organized into a biomechanical superorganism. Admiral Chen's response to this information? Asked Ambassador Zorex. General Vexhai consulted his notes. She thanked us for the intelligence and requested detailed star charts of the region. When I asked what she was planning, she said, and I quote, "Time to knock on their front door." The council chamber fell silent. The humans weren't content to drive the Void Swarm away from inhabited worlds. They were planning to attack the enemy's main base, a construct that contained more hostile biomechanical life than existed in the rest of the galaxy combined. They're going to get themselves killed, someone whispered. Dr. Vasquez shook her head. No, they're going to win. The question is what will be left of our galaxy when they're finished. As the council debated, Admiral Chen's fleet was already moving toward the galactic rim, carrying with them weapons and tactics that no civilized species had ever conceived. They were heading toward a final battle that would determine not just the fate of the galaxy, but the future of intelligent life itself. The Void Swarm had learned to fear humanity. Soon the rest of the galaxy would understand why. The dark matter construct loomed before the combined human and council fleets like a cancer, growing in the void between galaxies. Ambassador Cathara stared at the massive structure through the viewports of her flagship and tried to comprehend what she was seeing. The Void Swarm's main base stretched across light years of space, a writhing mass of biomechanical tissue that pulsed with stolen energy from a dozen consumed solar systems. Scanning indicates the construct contains approximately 4 trillion individual swarm entities, reported the sensor operator. The central control node appears to be located at the core, protected by multiple layers of adaptive shielding. Admiral Sarah Chen's voice crackled over the communication system from her heavily modified flagship, the UES Ragnarok. The ship barely resembled its original configuration, having been rebuilt using a combination of human engineering and captured swarm technology. It radiated heat signatures that would have been lethal to most species, and bristled with weapons that violated several laws of physics. Council Fleet, this is Admiral Chen. We're reading the same data. Recommend you maintain position at current distance while we handle the primary assault. Admiral, Cathara replied. Surely this requires a coordinated attack. The construct is too large for any single fleet to. Ma'am, with respect, coordination takes time we don't have. The swarm is already adapting to our presence. Every minute we delay gives them more opportunities to prepare countermeasures. Through her sensors, Cathara could see the human fleet preparing for what appeared to be a direct assault on the construct. There were fewer than 30 human ships left from the original fleet of 57, and most of those were heavily damaged from months of continuous combat. Against 4 trillion enemies protected by adaptive shielding, it should have been suicide. But Cathara had learned not to underestimate human tactical thinking. What's your plan, Admiral? Asked General Vexhai from his command ship. We're going to introduce the swarm to the concept of mutually assured destruction, Chen replied. But first we need to deliver a message. The lead human ships began broadcasting on all frequencies, sending a signal directly toward the construct's central node. The message was simple and translated into every known mathematical language. Surrender now, or face complete annihilation. Admiral, Cathara said carefully, the Void Swarm has never shown any inclination to communicate. What makes you think? Her question was answered as the construct suddenly erupted with activity. Millions of swarm entities began moving across its surface, organizing themselves into patterns that clearly conveyed meaning. The mathematical translation was immediate and clear. We do not surrender. We consume. We adapt. We survive. Expected response, Admiral Chen said calmly. All units execute final protocol. What followed was unlike anything the Council had ever witnessed. The human ships didn't attack the construct directly. Instead, they began deploying objects from their cargo holds, massive, irregular shapes that drifted slowly toward the swarm base. Admiral, what are those? General Vexhai demanded. Asteroids, came Chen's matter-of-fact reply. Specifically, asteroids from the Sol system's asteroid belt. We've spent the last month modifying them with everything we've learned about swarm technology. The asteroids continued their slow approach toward the construct, and as they drew closer, their true nature became apparent. These weren't just rocks. They were weapons of incredible sophistication, each one containing technology that combined human engineering with void swarm biomechanics. You weaponized asteroids? Cathara asked, in disbelief. We weaponized everything, Admiral Chen corrected. The asteroids are just the delivery system. The Void Swarm responded as expected, sending millions of entities to intercept and consume the approaching objects. But as the swarm began to absorb the asteroids, something unprecedented happened. Instead of being consumed, the asteroids began consuming the swarm. Impossible, whispered the Council's senior scientist. They've created a reverse-engineered version of swarm consumption technology. Not just reverse-engineered, Admiral Chen's voice carried a note of satisfaction. Improved. We've been studying swarm adaptation for months, learning how they convert matter and energy. These asteroids don't just consume, they learn and adapt faster than the original swarm can respond. The construct writhed in apparent agony as the weaponized asteroid spread throughout its structure like an infection. But the Void Swarm wasn't defenseless. It began adapting to the human weapon, developing countermeasures and resistance. "They're learning to fight back," General Vexhai observed. "Expected," Admiral Chen replied. Phase 2. The human fleet suddenly accelerated toward the construct at maximum velocity, but instead of spreading out for a conventional attack, they maintained tight formation, aiming directly for the central control node. "Admiral, you'll never penetrate the adaptive shielding with a direct assault," Kithara warned. "We're not planning to penetrate it," Chen replied. "We're planning to join it." The human ship struck the construct's outer defenses and, to everyone's amazement, didn't explode. Instead, they burrowed into the swarm's biomechanical tissue like parasites, using their own modified swarm technology to become part of the construct itself. "They're inside the enemy base," someone gasped. "Not just inside," Admiral Chen's voice came through clearly despite the interference. "We're becoming part of it. Human crews are now directly interfacing with the swarm's control systems." What followed was a battle fought not with weapons but with will. Human consciousness directly opposed the Void Swarm's collective intelligence in a conflict that took place within the construct's own neural networks. The humans weren't just fighting the swarm, they were trying to reprogram it. "Status report, Admiral," General Vexhai requested. "We're learning things," came Chen's strained reply. "The swarm isn't evil, General, it's just hungry. It doesn't understand the concept of enough. It consumes because that's the only way it knows how to survive." "Can you stop it?" "We're not stopping it," Chen replied. "We're teaching it." The construct's movements began to change. Instead of the aggressive, predatory motions the Council had learned to fear, the swarm entities began moving with something resembling purpose beyond consumption. The biomechanical tissue started organizing itself into new patterns, creating structures that served functions other than pure consumption. "What are you doing to them?" Kithara asked. "We're showing them what we learned from fighting them," Admiral Chen replied. "How to adapt without consuming everything, how to survive without destroying, how to be strong without being alone." The transformation of the construct continued for hours. When it finally stopped, what remained was still massive and alien, but no longer hostile. The Void Swarm entities had been fundamentally changed, retaining their adaptive capabilities, but gaining something they had never possessed before: restraint. "The Central Intelligence is requesting communication," reported the Council's communication officer. The message that came from the construct was unlike anything the Void Swarm had ever transmitted. It contained concepts like gratitude, understanding, and most remarkably, apology. "We did not know," the message read. "We consumed because we did not understand that survival could exist without consumption. The small hard ones have taught us new patterns. We will learn. We will adapt. We will not consume the galaxy of many voices." Admiral Chen's final transmission came as the human fleet began to disengage from the construct. Council fleet. Mission accomplished. The Void Swarm is no longer a threat to galactic civilization. Repeat, the enemy has been neutralized through conversion rather than destruction. But as the human ships emerged from the construct, it became clear that victory had come at a cost. The vessels that emerged were no longer entirely human in design. They had been fundamentally altered by their integration with swarm technology, becoming something new and strange. "Admiral Chen, are you still human?" Kithara asked carefully. There was a long pause before the reply came. "Define human, Ambassador. We are what we have always been. Adaptive, determined, and willing to do whatever is necessary to protect what matters. If that makes us less human in your eyes, then perhaps being human was never the important part." As the combined fleets began their journey back to Council space, reports started coming in from across the galaxy. Void Swarm entities were systematically withdrawing from all occupied worlds, leaving behind damaged but recoverable planets. The threat that had terrified an entire galaxy for months had simply ended. But the questions raised by the resolution would echo through galactic society for generations. The humans had saved the galaxy by becoming something beyond human. They had defeated an unstoppable enemy by teaching it to stop itself. They had preserved civilization by fundamentally altering their own nature. In the months that followed, the Terran Exclusion Protocol was established. Humans were granted full membership in galactic society, but with the understanding that they represented something fundamentally different from other species. They were the ones you called when the impossible needed to be accomplished, when acceptable losses needed to be redefined, when victory required sacrifice that no civilized being should be asked to make.